Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. With this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 4 of the anime series, Death Parade. And this was another hella awesome episode, I gotta say. Not least of which because I like how they kind of sort of threw a wrench in the works of the status quo when it comes to these games of arbitration. In this particular episode, it harkens back to the arcade game days of old. And we're debuted to these two new characters coming into Quindecim. This woman who is very much sort of a reality TV personality, kind of the Kate plus 8 scenario, where she's a single mother, she's got 5 children, and she's a personality. You know, this young guy is basically sort of soft-spoken. We get the aesthetic that he's kind of geeky, maybe, and he's very much sort of taken aback by her being overly persuasive after they've gotten into Quindecim and they've tried all the doors and tried to escape, find a way out, as most people tend to do, as we've seen in previous episodes. And then she pulls him off into the ladies' room and basically outlines the idea that this, to her, seems very much like a hidden camera show scenario. And so let's, make a good show of it. Let's be on game and everything. And I'll give you little pointers here and there. I'll whisper to you what you should probably do and what, they're expecting of you. That kind of scenario. So she goes and basically point blank asks, Decim and his assistant, what's going on, and they play their game of arbitration. So they get this arcade game set up, and I love the little off-the-cuff remarks she makes about, wow, they must have a lot of money on this show. But they start playing the game. And unlike episodes we've seen previously where, there was some sort of link between the games of arbitration, be it billiards, darts, what have you, bowling, with the personal anatomy of the players. Each opponent, their opposite opponent would have, their heart in the billiard balls, and if they pocketed them, well, they would feel like they were having a heart attack, or if they pocketed the eyes, they'd feel like they were going blind. In the episode with the husband and wife with the dartboard, if he hit her stomach, she was like cradling her belly in pain and everything like that. Whereas in this episode with the arcade game, we see that inside this sort of very much Street Fighter II aesthetic, both of the personifications of this man and this woman are very much akin to their truest selves, arguably. He's sort of very much the otaku. He's carrying around action figures and, talking about Blu-ray is part of his attack and everything, hearkening to his innermost self, the self that he doesn't show the world when he was alive. And the most sort of key aesthetics to her persona is that, lifestyles of the rich and famous, all the dreams and things she's been shooting for in her fame and her seeking of fame. And through the flashbacks that we get as part of this whole scenario, we see that, both of these characters have had and led tumultuous lifestyles. From his early age as a young boy, he saw his parents divorce, eventually his father remarried, and he never quite sat well with the woman who sort of became his, next mother, if you will, or mother-in-law, whatever you want to call it, stepmother. And we see that, a lot of his life was being a loner and being off on his own and being very depressive, so to speak, to the point that we find out he does take his life. And that's what leads him in Quindecim. Whereas the woman, she became much a monster out of all the abuses she suffered. We find that she had been in many relationships, was used and abused by all these guys. This is what led her to having all these children, effectively. And she became very much a victim turned monster, turning her hand on her own assistant or manager or whatever it is who set up an impromptu appointment she wasn't happy with without consulting with her first and all this stuff. And it's this woman who effectively takes her life out of sort of retribution or whatever you want to call it, revenge, vengeance, that kind of stuff. And so basically, as the first round is done and he has, wiped the floor with her in this Street Fighter II sort of game, she ends up whispering to him, you know what, now let's try something a little bit different. Let me win the next round. Because there's, all these memories coming back of all the abuses she suffered. And I think even though she's not on the cusp as yet, as of that point, to guessing what exactly is going on, she is starting to get a little vengeful. She is starting to get a little prideful. She wants to be the winner, effectively. And so we see that he's going along with this for the second round. And this is where they debut another aspect of this game of arbitration that I find absolutely fascinating. We see that Decim's assistant is kind of taken aback by the fact that he's got something in his hand, this little device. He presses a button, And this coincides with that point in the game where the guy's actually starting to fight. Even though he said he wasn't going to, he decides, I'm not going to sit by and let her just beat my ass in this game. And he starts playing. He starts fighting her. And then Decim hits this button, and the little ball on the top of his controller pops off. And you see the assistant just sort of wide-eyed, mouth agape, like, what is this about? What are you doing? And Decim goes on to describe this is a way in which we're trying to find the darkness inside the soul, the deepest darkness, the truest personification of this person's character. And we see that this kid, basically he loses that second round, and this is where those flashbacks of his adopted mother or stepmother, if you will, come into play, and we find out that something that she was very much wishing for and hoping for was that he would see her as a true mother, call her mama, and that kind of stuff. And it's heart-wrenching when you piece together, he took his own life because of this stuff, and he came to regret it. But before we even get to that point, we basically have these two pitted against each other once again. And this time the tables are turned because Decim hits that device again, and the ball pops off her controller. And you're thinking, you see her leaping off her seat to go catch that piece of the controller. She desperately wants to win. And then you hear this loud crash, boom, bang as we're focusing on some words between Decim and his assistant. And they both look over sort of in horror to see this woman smashing this young man's face into the screen of his side of the arcade game. And, this is where just the madness ensues. It kind of harkens back to what we saw in the OVA between the man and the older man and the young man. The young man sort of, attacked this older guy because they realized their lives were at stake. And at this point, that's exactly what's going on in her mind. She's thinking, if I lose this game, I'm going to lose my life. They're still not aware that they have actually died. And this is finally where that revelation hits home. And so, she just goes absolutely psychotic to the point where those, Spider-Man webs or whatever you want to call them come out from the ceiling and have to pull her up and, restrain her. And there's a point where she finally has this, moment of realization of selflessness. She finally puts herself to the side and she thinks of her children, having left them behind, as unhappy as we see that they were. She was very much consumed with herself and self-absorbed and all this stuff. In some of the flashbacks, you see them sort of looking at her like they're suffering because of whatever it is, the psychological trauma that she has suffered and the monster she's become. And she sort of breaks herself free of the restraints and ends up landing in Decim's arms. And much as I speculated sort of early on in the series after watching the OVA, very similarly to that OVA, we see Decim openly embrace her. He openly embraces the young man as well at this point. Even with the glass shattered all in his face and everything. And it's intriguing to me because this seems to be Decim stepping beyond what is his normal job aesthetic, his job requirement. He's not supposed to, show any emotion. He's supposed to be a cold, logical arbiter. And ever since this assistant came into the fray, she has added that level of emotion. She's added that level of reactionary sort of, going beyond logic, going beyond what is coldly acceptable within this environment as far as the arbitration goes. And it seems almost as though it's rubbed off on Decim, but the way the assistant looks at him when he's embracing these two and when he shares the words of encouragement, you two have done so well and you've come so far, that kind of aesthetic, trying to ease their minds before they're going on to heaven or hell or reincarnation or the void, whatever you want to call it. The look she gives him suggests to me that she does not wholly believe Decim is being true to himself. Like, at this point, maybe he's only mimicking, the emotional undercurrent that she has shown in the decision-making process in the last couple of episodes. And I think this kind of falls in line with my speculation in that I began to wonder, and I voiced in a previous episode discussion video, would this be a learning curve for Decim to go beyond his sort of, if you will, programming or his designated job, what is required of him as an arbiter, to touch base on those emotional equivalents and everything like that? Would he go beyond cold, calculable logic in his dealings with these particular people, with their souls on the line. And so in the end, we see that, in fact, he goes up, she goes down, as per the white face mask and the devil face mask on the elevators, which I have to admit, calling back on the last episode, it really left me hanging because I hadn't taken note of the fact that those two little face masks were different previous episode. I was still questioning by the end of that episode, who passed on and who went to hell, that kind of scenario. And it turned out we had the answer right in front of us if you paid attention to those particular little face masks. So very interesting for the future to see who goes up, who goes down in the future, as well as how many more gimmicks and little attachments and things like that Decim and all these Arbiters have up their sleeves, and how much more into question they're going to be called by this particular assistant, who I've actually done some digging and found out the name of this assistant is actually supposed to be Onna, I believe, Onna. I don't know if we're actually going to ever get her name in the series as it is, but yeah, just a thrilling episode once again. And I love how they've broken ties with the norm already, just 4 episodes into the series, which spells a lot of potential for the future. How much more is going to go against type as we've already come to understand it. There's so much potential going into each episode, knowing that the games can be different, the devices they have. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 4 of Death Parade if you've seen it. Highly recommend you check it the hell out if you haven't. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and that it finds you well. And I'll catch you all later. Peace.